Christmas, John and Louis and Aunt Eddie and Uncle Roy always came over and stayed with us. The usually at Christmas dinner, little Auntie would join us, and before Aunt Billy's mother died, she always came for Christmas dinner. The other thing that was always interesting, again, and shows a bit of Uncle Frank's character, we all slept over, John and Louis and myself. We were the only children. And we always, before we could even go and peek into the living room and see what Santa Claus had brought, we had to have a big breakfast and sit and have it in the kitchen so that we couldn't see into the living room. We didn't have too many, had a lot of presents, but not too many. Normally we each got one big present. And then a lot of small presents that we gave to each other, plus the presents that we got in our stockings. Frank always put an envelope on the Christmas tree that had a $5 bill in it, and in those days $5 was like getting $100 today in what it would buy, because as I mentioned earlier, movies were 10 cents for a child, 25 cents for an adult, and so forth. Well, not really one memorable one. I guess my catcher's mitt and my catcher's mask. The next, I got a catcher's mitt one year. I got a catcher's mask the next year. And I really liked that. And a football, of course. And when you got your football present, that was always a big day. And we had fireworks on Christmas just as much as we did on the 4th of July. And Uncle Frank was kind of a half radio buff. And I remember one Christmas, we gave him Aunt Billy gave him a new Philco radio, and all us kids gave him the clock that would turn it on and off automatically. So we all, when he came home for Christmas Eve dinner, we'd already had it delivered. Aunt Billy had it delivered. We all stood in front of the radio, so when he came in, he wouldn't be able to see it. And while we were having dinner, all of a sudden, the clock worked and turned on the radio. And we all said, who turned on the radio and everything? And we got Uncle Frank to go in, and that's how he saw it. But he would sit, he had two big aerials out in the back, two big poles, and a wire between them. And he would sit there and bring in shortwave stations from all over the world, South Africa, Europe. I can't remember him getting Australia. But the other thing we did was when shooting off the fireworks at Christmas and 4th of July, we'd put cherry bombs under cans, and we'd see whether it would blow the can above this wire that was on the big long pole. And sure, yeah, because I can always remember a story about Uncle Frank. He had a scar here on his head, and it was when he was pledging the Phi Delta Theta fraternity at the University of Texas that on his hell night before he got in, they made him take off all his clothes, and they started shooting Roman candles at him and hit him in the back with Roman candles, and he was running so hard it was dark, and he ran into a wall and cut this big gash in his head. But back in those days, that's kids nowadays don't understand, but part of growing up was the hazing that went on, both when you're high school fraternity, and then when I went to military school, it was really tough. If you just kind of turned around, they would beat you with a paddle. And if you really did something bad, they would use their sabers. And but everybody considered it, part part of the school tradition and part of the fraternity tradition. And then I can remember when I got out of the Army, then the veterans coming back to college started changing the fraternities a bit, because here were guys that had, people had been shooting machine guns at, and some of the older fraternity brothers would tell them to assume the position, and they would just kind of look at them, and they said, well, you don't have to, I guess. Because though it still was still part of the tradition. And then I remember while I was at the University of Missouri, some pledge must have told his folks about it, because she went to the president of the University of Missouri, and all the fraternities, the hazing kind of phased on out from there on. There wasn't any, there was still hazing, but it was things like painting up your face and everything, little kid stuff rather than the real McCoy. So one of the things that sticks in my memory when I was in high school, I had these, as I had mentioned earlier, I was the youngest person in my class, and so that even on the football team, that made me much younger than the seniors when I was a junior in high school. And I had these two good friends that were seniors, Richard Rogers and Charlie Dewey's, and they got recruited by the University of Texas to maybe play football for them. So Aunt Billy and Uncle Frank was working on a big law case in Kansas City, and Aunt Billy would go up and he would stay up there for a month at a time, and Aunt Billy would go up and spend a week and then come back and stay. And I stayed at home. But this was when I was in high school. Yeah, I stayed by myself, except for the maid. Marcella was there. And so they talked me into, I was driving the car by then, and they got me to sneak the car out and drive it down to Austin. And on the way down there, Charlie Dewey's was driving, and he mashed up the rear fender. So we came on back home, and I only had about 2 days to get it fixed before Aunt Billy was coming back. And so I got it fixed, and I went down. I remember I had my father's gold watch. And so we didn't have enough money to pay. I think it was $27 to fix the whole fender. We didn't have $27 or even close to it. So I gave him the gold watch to hold as a thing while we tried to come up with the money by the next Tuesday. I guess this was on a Saturday. Anyway, to make a long story short, we tried. We never could come up with about $12 borrowing 50 cents here and 75 cents. So I remember one of the worst moments of my life was I came home on the Tuesday afternoon, and as I'm driving my bike up the street to our house, I see this guy just going up the steps, and it's the guy that had been where we had the fender fixed. So now the whole story was going to come out, so I got in really big trouble over that one too. And but fortunately, Aunt Billy and Uncle Frank was out of town, so Aunt Billy had kind of cooled things down by the time he got back, and but she pretty well blamed Richard and Charlie for taking advantage of me. But of course, I was all for it anyway, so it was a lot of. Well, she blamed me, but she didn't blame me as much as if I hadn't had the two older boys who kind of led me. No, not a whole lot. Well, yes, yeah. I mean, I'm sure she did, and she maybe mediated when she had a story. There was another time that I was in high school that I used to do in my schoolwork. We had 3 6-week periods that they call semesters that made up 3 periods that made up a semester. And I would nearly always the first semester not work at the first period not work at all, and end up with D's and F's and so forth. And then the second one I would work a little bit and come up with C's, and then in order to get the average up above C, I would have to make all A's on the last period. And so one time I was had really done bad. I think it was geometry. I didn't get F's, but I was going to get it. I got an F in this course, and it had something to do with they weren't going to let me play on the baseball team unless I got above a C average. And so the only way I could do it was to get some ink eradicator when they sent the grades home, and eradicate the F, and I made it into a B, and so everything was getting along fine. And they always, when you made an F, they mailed a card to your parents to make sure that they explained and they were aware of it. So I would leave school and race home with my bicycle to beat the postman and get him down at the thing, because I was going to get the letter that they would send home. I was going to get it and tear it up. So turned out that by the end of 5 or 6 days, nothing happened. So I went off on Saturday and went and played baseball in a baseball game. And I come home, and something was wrong with one of the cars. And Aunt Billy had gone downtown to pick up Uncle Frank. And when I got home, I saw the letter sitting there. So I opened it, so I knew I was dead. And that was the only other time that I got to strap Uncle Frank. I guess I was about 11, 12, something like that. I guess I was in high school, so I must have been 13. But I went into high school when I was 13. So those were kind of a few of the little bad ones. I can't think of any good ones that I had through this period, except that I was always helpful at home and didn't cause too much trouble, didn't get into too many things. I was I always figured that if you were going to get caught at something, be sure you did a big thing. Don't irritate your parents by doing little things all the time that just keep you kind of in a, which I saw a lot of my friends do, and some of my children were kind of that way, that they always kind of kept things at a little bit of an upset by causing little upsets, and I would give on anything. And then when I didn't always get caught, of course, but it seems like you always get caught. But I didn't do many little bad things. When I did a bad thing, it was a big one, because, and then it kind of paid off that you weren't keeping them upset all the time. So that would be my advice to my grandchildren, is don't bug your parents, because bugging them is a thing that then when you do something a little bit bad, it becomes a big bad thing.
Now, did Aunt Billy always have did she always drive to go into the cars?
We had one car up until 1940. We got two cars in 1940. Frank got a Ford, and Aunt Billy always drove the big car. And it was the funniest thing, our house on Virginia Place, the driveway had curves on both sides. And Aunt Billy was just under 5 feet tall, or just 5 feet. She was the tallest of the three sisters. She was 5 feet, and then Aunt Eddie was about 4 feet 11. So to continue the story, out of the 20 men, I recognized either 10 or 11. As a matter of fact, when Deanne and I were having breakfast at the lodge where we were staying, a woman came in to eat, saw me, ran across, threw her arms around me, and said, "Oh, Joe, it's so great to see you." And after about 2 minutes of my dancing around, because I didn't want to admit that I didn't know who she was, she said to me, "You don't know who I am, do you?" And I said, "Well, I hate to admit it, but I don't." And she said, "I'm Nancy Tomlinson." And Nancy Tomlinson had lived across the street from me from the time I was 7 years old until I went off to New Mexico Military Institute, which was about the same. That's all the way through high school. And yet she had changed so much I didn't recognize her. So that was the biggest shock to me, is how much more women seem to change than men from a look standpoint. And there could be a lot of reasons for it, but there's a much where some of the men looked exactly the same as they did. And as far as I can remember, everyone recognized me, so I had not changed that much in looks from the time that I was in high school in the 40 years. Moving on from high school, wait a minute, what? Well, we had, maybe just as a happen so, two of Ambit and Uncle Frank's very good friends. One was a dentist and one was a doctor. So they were personal friends, had been personal friends since, I guess in the case of Mr. Phillips, or Dr. Phillips, the dentist, had been since boyhood. And Dr. Neighbors. And then, of course, I had a second cousin, I can't remember his name, who was a doctor. But I would not say that I'd say we were an average family as far as the use of doctors went. I had my tonsils out, which was very prevalent in those days.
But how would it feel like doctors?
Oh, you were, well, if anything, I guess you respected and revered doctors more in my day than they do now, when you feel that doctors are much more in it for the commercial value rather than to really heal the sick, as we say. From there, at my other experiences at New Mexico Military Institute were a heightened sense of discipline, I think. It was not a really great experience. I guess out of all of the, never much on school anyway, and a military school certainly wasn't my bag. And because the amount of time, the discipline, the over-discipline, there just weren't that many great memories that you have there of anything being good or anything being bad. One of the cutest things about the school, and cute is kind of a funny word to use, but we all laughed about it. You had a demerit system, and for the upperclassmen, you got 3 demerits for throwing a bag of laundry out of the second-story stoop, and you got 2 demerits for throwing a plebe out of the second-story stoop. But you know, it's like everything. It was a great learning experience. I'm sure it stood me in good stead, certainly in the Army, and because I didn't have the dramatic change of civilian life to the Army disciplined life, and it was much easier for me to accept than a lot of the people I went into. I went into the Army Air Corps Reserve program when I was 17. Not that I was that carried away with flying like some of the people I met later who all they wanted to do was get to the wild blue yonder and this sort of bit. They'd rather fly than eat. But it was a very practical decision on my part, was that if I went into the Air Corps Reserve, I would be in the Air Corps, where you got paid 50% more, and secondly, that you didn't have to slog around in dirty old trenches and everything. The only drawback, of course, is that you had the odds were that you were much more likely to be killed than in any other part of the service, because you didn't. It wasn't that you were liable to be injured. It was either you got killed or you were alive. But among the air crew, there was only one part of this other services that they had a higher kill ratio than on air crew members. And the amazing thing about air crew, there were actually more Army Air Corps crewmen killed in training than were killed in combat, if you can believe it, because there was just so many accidents with airplanes and things in those days. And but the one part of the service that had a higher kill ratio was a Marine second lieutenant, not the total Marines, but the Marine second lieutenant, the guy that had to lead the charge onto the beach. He had a higher kill ratio. Anyhow, but that was the other thing. The Air Corps experience, was one of the fine experiences of my life. I met some wonderful people. Went into aviation cadets. I was very fortunate again that I went in through the reserves, because by the time I went in, which was November of 1943, one of the things they told us, if you join the reserve, this was the third thing, it'll be 5 to 6 months before you're called up. On October the 7th, 1943, which was my 18th birthday, my orders were in the mailbox to report 30 days later for duty. So that didn't work out as well. But anyway, I met a lot of fine people, and about halfway through my training, the Battle of the Bulge happened, and we were getting too many Air Corps. They could see the war in Europe was winding down to a close, and of course at that time no one knew about the atomic bomb, but that they wouldn't have the need for as many Army Air Corps crewmen as in the past, so they, what we call, washed out 2/3 of my class, and the only ones that they kept were excuse me, the group of us who came in through the reserve, because in order to move us from the Air Corps to a non-flying status, since we'd come in through the Air Corps Reserve, they would have had to discharge us and redraft us. So this was a very, very fortunate thing, because then I went on and finished. I went to gunnery school first, then I went to bombardier school, gunnery school in Kingman, Arizona, bombardier school at Albuquerque, New Mexico, and then to radar bombardier navigator school at Victorville, California. It was after that time, after I graduated from there, I was then assigned to a air crew and stationed at Alamogordo, New Mexico. And afterwards, it's one of the most interesting experiences of my life, was that we normally, when we were going on a mission, and I had to fly a lot of missions, because out of 24 crews, there were only 6 radar bombardier navigators. So each time they went on a practice mission, they had to have a radar bombardier navigator on board. And so I was having to fly. I had my own crew, but then I had to go with 3 other crews. So I was flying 4 times as many practice missions as others. So after I'd flown, a couple of guys got sick, and I flew for 30 straight days, 12-hour practice missions. So I went into the colonel and said, I think I should get a week off. And he said, why? And I explained to him what had happened. He said, I couldn't agree with you more, Lieutenant Wren, and wrote the orders right there to give me a week furlough. And this is I was out sailing. I went back to Fort Worth, and I'm sailing on the Eagle Mountain Lake, and I see a big flash in the sky, which was 2 airplanes colliding. And the next morning in the paper, one of the planes was from Alamogordo, and the other plane was from someplace in Tennessee. And the place that I had a big plus on the other radar bombardier navigators, because one of the 3 places that you would go to make practice runs was Fort Worth. And so you were bombing the stockyards, and I knew exactly where the stockyards were. So our radar in those days, so it was very good. By today's standards, it was just the pits. But I knew going down Jacksboro Highway about where the stockyards were. So where they would get mixed up between about 4 or 5 big blips, I knew which blip was it. Anyhow, I read in the paper the next morning that the crew from Alamogordo was one of the crews that I would have been on had I not gotten this week's furlough. So those are the little life's coincidences that, because it was not my crew, but it was a crew that I was an alternate guy on. And there were 12 people who went down with the plane. This is why you got such a high ratio, because, as I say, when 2 planes ran into each other, nobody got out, or very few people did. But then the other thing that happened at Alamogordo, we normally, when we were going on a practice mission, we would report at the flight line at 4 a.m. to be briefed and then go off on the mission at 6 o'clock. Well, this one day they said you don't need to come until 5:15. So at the time that we had about 5 o'clock in the morning, we'd had our breakfast and were straggling down to the briefing hut. And all of a sudden, the sky lit up like it was noon. And it was just starting to turn from night to day, and yet all of a sudden it just lit up like noon, and you felt the ground shake and everything, and we talked about it, but didn't have any idea, and it turned out that was the first test of the atomic bomb that happened. It's only 30 miles away from where we were. And this would have been 45, yeah, 45, yeah, early 40. Yeah, oh yeah. Did they all in August? So it was early in 45. Thank you. This is my little friend is over here. Let's see my little friend. Let's see what there's my little friend. We're sitting here at home. Aunt Wendy's taken Kevin and Clark back to meet their mother, Debbie, halfway, and Emily has gone with them. So there's just Jody and Brian and me here at home while I'm doing this recording. And Brian, can you see yourself over there in the picture? Can you see yourself? Who is that? Brian. That's Brian. That's right. He just said that's Brian. Okay. Run on back to your mommy. Huh? Run over to your mommy. No, historically, what? only thing historically, I was in school when the Texas Centennial came on, and it was in 1936 for 100 years, and we spent almost the whole year just doing things about the Centennial, which was very exciting, and gave. I'm sure I learned so much more about Texas history than I would have learned had it not been that I happened to be in school during that period. Not that Texas always was big on its own history, but it was even bigger because of the Centennial year. Then so we had just gotten our flyaway plane, and we're in Sacramento, California, when they dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, and so because of that, there was no need to send our squadron overseas. So we did take a few ferry missions where we were ferrying people back. But B-29s, that's what I flew on, the B-29. Really wasn't made to ferry people because it was made to drop bombs, not to ferry people. However, again, they always had to have a radar bombardier navigator on board. So, and then as just a really lucky break, the last 4 months of my Army career, I was transferred back to Fort Worth, Texas, to Tarrant Air Force Base there. And no, well, actually, again, that was the only other time I went to the colonel. Half of our group was going to be transferred to, our squadron was going to be transferred to Fort Worth, and the other half was going to be transferred back to Albuquerque, New Mexico, of all places. And so I went in to the colonel and said to him, I don't know which one I'm on, but it probably doesn't make a whole lot of difference. It's only that we've only have so long until we're probably going to be discharged. But I'm from Fort Worth, I'm sure, so he said he'd see what he could do about it, and whether I was already scheduled for Fort Worth, but at least I didn't take a chance on just hoping the 50-50 was going to work. I went in, wait until afterward, and you wouldn't have had it because the orders were already cut. You got to grab things at the flood, or you're not going to grab them half the time. The other. I was in the, I was discharged in 1946. So, in February of 1946, so I was in 2.5 years in the service for 2.5 years. Then I came back in the fall of 46. I went to TCU. Primarily, I just wanted to spend another year at home. I'd been away at military school. I'd gone into the service, and so I lived at home and went to TCU. My second year of college, really, and then I went on to the University of Missouri in the fall of 1947, and by then by the time I went to TCU, by the time I got out of the service, I had definitely locked in that I wanted to go into the advertising business. And so Aunt Billy, who had taught school, one of her students ran the largest advertising agency in Fort Worth, which wasn't a very large advertising agency, but at least he was a good person, and he let me come down there for about a month during that summer and just observe, and then I was really locked in that was the business. It looked like everybody was, it was a pressure business, which I like. It was a fun business, which I like. It was a business of the manipulating of people, or the trying to mold people into certain phases so they would buy certain things, which was very like probably what I really would have most wanted to be, I guess if it hadn't been for all the work, was a lawyer. There are many things that you do when you're making presentations to clients and things like that. It's almost like being in a courtroom. You're giving all the reasons for doing it or not doing it and coming up with an answer. So I decided, okay, I'm going to be in the advertising business, and at that time there were really only 3 top advertising schools in the United States. New York University in New York, Northwestern in Evanston, which is a suburb of Chicago, and the University of Missouri, which was world-renowned for its journalism school, of which advertising was a part of. So I decided to take 2 weeks. Since Uncle Frank was a railroad lawyer, incidentally, he was a lawyer for the Santa Fe Railroad, so we always got passes on the railroad. So that allowed us to take a lot more railroad trips. And even though I had been in the service and was now up to going to college, they allowed me to keep my pass. Even though I was in my 20s, where normally you had to give up your pass when you were 21 as a child because of my service time. So I got on the train and went to New York, and I didn't like NYU at all. Didn't like the city to go to school in. Didn't like